In the days following Friday's terrorist attack, the Russian government has focused its attention on two main issues: the return of the death penalty and how they believe Ukraine is involved in the terrorist attack. The first issue, the return of the death penalty, which, might be a surprise for some of you, for those of you who don't know at least, that Russia doesn't have the death penalty, at least not since the Soviet Union. We'll talk about why that's important a bit later. They're talking about bringing it back. Obviously, a lot of people are out for blood right now, an eye for an eye, going Old Testament here. However, aside from politicians, the public seems fairly in opposition to the return of the death penalty. In a survey from the Telegram channel Brief on the 25th, 78% of the nearly 19,500 votes were against reinstating the death penalty. Additionally, most political analysts, legal experts, and other political commentators are also largely against the return of the death penalty. So, why is the Russian government so fixated on bringing it back? Well, if I were to guess, it's just an easy measure to make it seem as though they are being tough on terror and also migrant crime. Obviously, in the wake of an attack like what was seen on Friday, the public wants a show of force in connection to public safety, and the government needs to show that it is doing something. Likely due to the fact that government and security forces, private security forces, were seen as largely inefficient on Friday evening. Currently in the Russian language discourse on Telegram, there are a lot of questions directed at security forces, specifically the police, but also the private ones. People are pointing out that on Friday evening, there were police officers present in Crocus City Hall at the time of the shooting, but they didn't do anything to help. In fact, they seem to have run away, and they didn't really, help people escape, or at least even do much to try to stop the attackers. So instead of focusing on improving security measures with regards to attacks like this, or with a discussion of how there might be greater oversight into intelligence services such as the FSB here in Russia, the government is instead opting for the loudest and most violent option available, returning the death penalty. However, as I said before, most people do seem to be against it, both on the individual and expert levels. The reasons for this are, a few, and they're kind of the same as they are everywhere in the world. First off is the fact that the death penalty does very little to actually stop such horrendous crimes. Mainly it's there as a scare tactic to persuade people to not do such violence. But if we look at statistics from other countries that have the death penalty, it doesn't really seem to do much. Some Russian experts have even pointed to Iran, which has many laws which the death penalty is applicable to. And crime rates are not significantly different there than they would be in any other country without the death penalty. Another reason why people are opposed to the death penalty here is that cutting the perpetrators' lives short is to many seen as the easy way out. The idea is that sitting in solitary confinement in a Russian prison for the rest of their days, stuck with their thoughts and eventual remorse, completely alone, is a fate worse than death for them. And to be honest, I think that's probably the case. Lastly, and most importantly, is that there is no taking back the action if evidence is later discovered. Once it's done, it's done. There are other reasons why experts are not on board with the return of the death penalty. And the big thing is ultimately just boils down to the Russian judicial system, mainly the fact that most people don't have faith in its impartiality. First, if I'm not mistaken, there are no trials by jury for those who would face the death penalty, which, coupled with the more than 99% conviction rate by state prosecutors, basically means that anyone tried for a crime punishable by death would be executed. And right now, the talk is focused on bringing the death penalty back just for terrorists and extremists. However, the Russian government has labeled political opposition leaders this way, as well as anyone connected to the LGBTQ movement. In effect, anyone who received the label in the future, whether they actually committed a crime which resulted in multiple deaths, or simply supported, say, same-sex marriage, or spoke critically against the Russian government, any of these people could be theoretically placed on death row, and there's no guarantee that execution wouldn't be extended as a punishment to other crimes. And this is where we have to talk about the past. Political scientist Mikhail Vinogradov noted that in the history of Russia during the 20th century, the most resonant executions were those of the political, military, and cultural elite. Executions were more widely used, of course, but victims among the establishment included 1 emperor, 2 prime ministers, 10 vice ministers, 3 secretaries of the Moscow City Council, 9 heads of departments connected to internal affairs and state security, which Vinogradov believes should be a sufficient argument for today's elite to not be in a rush to do it all again. The Soviet Union was the last time the death penalty existed in these lands, and it was most famously used by Joseph Stalin and the NKVD to carry out mass executions by the state of anyone even remotely suspected of being a threat, with a simple accusation by a neighbor being all it might take for somebody to be taken away in the night. However, this didn't end with the death of Stalin. As journalist Andrei Medvedev pointed out, even in the 1960s, after the era of Stalinist purges, Yan Rokotov and Vladislav Vybyshenko were executed for stealing currency or for selling currency. Suffice it to say, there is a historical precedent for people to be worried about the state abusing the death penalty. As it currently stands, no one is even sure what steps would have to be taken for the death penalty to be reinstated. Some claim a referendum would have to be put forth and voted on by the people. Others say that the Supreme Court can make the decision itself, with another group stating that the Constitution would have to be rewritten, meaning another countrywide vote. This last option is all the more fun because the last time they changed the Constitution in such a fashion, they decided that it meant Putin's term limit was reset. So if they did it again, in theory, Putin could be, keep using the title president until 2042. I also want to point out that if it does come down to a vote, I have little doubt it will go any way other than how the Russian government wants it to go. Ultimately, it's unclear if this is all hot air or if the state is really planning to go forward with this, though if one were to judge by the frequency with which the topic has popped up since the start of the war, I'd say it's something they're keenly interested in. The other news story is that the Russian government is dead set on Ukraine being responsible for the terror attack at Crocus City Hall. In fact, Putin, the head of the FSB, and the head of the State Investigation Committee have all stated as such, as well as making allusions to the United States and/or the United Kingdom being involved as orchestrating the whole thing. As far as I and everyone in Russia and the world has seen, the only evidence that they've given with regards to these accusations is the fact that the terrorists were driving in the direction of the Ukrainian border, which doesn't really make for an open and shut case. That said, I have heard that at least one of the accused has admitted to having connections to Ukraine, but we've seen these men tortured with electrical shocks to the genitals, general beatings, an eye basically knocked out of its socket, and an ear literally cut off. And it doesn't take an expert to understand that the evidence gathered when torture is employed is effectively worthless. I mean, hell, if we're going to go back to the topic of Stalinist purges, those who were about to be executed would often say whatever they thought would save their skins, which it ultimately didn't. Anyway, who knows? Maybe the Kremlin has got some bombshell evidence they're getting ready to drop on us all. But for now, ISIS-K has taken full responsibility for the attack, even publishing videos that the attackers themselves filmed and directing a message to the Russian government, which I'm guessing is also something that they do at the behest of Western governments orchestrating the whole thing to make the whole story more believable. ISIS is also a well-known problem in Russia, with another group of terrorists being apprehended by the FSB and local police forces on the 26th in Ingushetia in the south of Russia. But maybe those were also Ukrainian, American, British assets. In addition to that, on the 25th and 26th, Turkey detained nearly 150 individuals suspected of being connected to ISIS. 2 of the terrorists from Crocus City Hall traveled to Turkey earlier this year, but that's just a coincidence, right? Honestly, it seems as though the Russian government is just going to ignore all of these clear and obvious facts, or if not ignore them, they're going to say that it's all being done by the shadowy reach of the CIA, a claim which, without hard proof, means that someone could turn around and make an equally valid case that the Russian government actually committed the terror attack and that they planned it to look like this so that they could turn around and blame the United States and Kiev for it, so that international support for the war would be lost. It's conspiratorial thinking, which hinges on assumptions of actors' intentions and not on the objective facts at hand. That said, if the Kremlin does have some irrefutable evidence, they should probably make that public sooner rather than later. As it stands right now, the majority of Russian political analysts and experts in fields connected to war and terrorism don't seem to buy what Putin's trying to sell. Before I wrap this all up, I want to say that last Friday evening, I was actually planning to make a video highlighting all these small news stories starting from the 19th of March. Then, for obvious reasons, that didn't happen. However, I've got everything more or less organized with these stories, so I'll try and get that out in a day or two with whatever else happens in the meanwhile. Even though the terror attack and its repercussions are the most important stories right now, a lot of others got steamrolled over the weekend, and I do want to give them time. I don't want them to get left behind. So keep your eyes open for that. For now, this has been Russia in Context. Thanks for watching.